Patch 1.07 is big, like really big. Apparently big enough to make a video about it. DLC speculation, new PvP balancing, lightning strike skill is actually good somehow. Well, I mean, it's not good. It's better than it was, I guess. The Ice Lightning Sword got a buff. That's pretty cool. I'm honestly just gonna level with you here for a bit. You need a VPN, man. Like, seriously. Cyber attacks and identity theft are a dime a dozen nowadays. Using internet away from home and connecting to Dave's totally unconspicuous Wi-Fi while you're out for coffee is pretty much asking to get cocked over. But having a VPN will make sure your data is encrypted. NordVPN also has a threat protection feature that identifies suspicious links and phishing attempts, so if you're as tired of those dipshit Discord Nitro scams as I am, then once again, well, this might be your answer. Prevent password attacks, brute forcing, key logging, DDoS attempts, getting doxxed, probably. Gee, I sure can't wait to spend my time watching weird anime, romance, fantasy films like Your Name. The shit you mean it isn't available in the States? Well, hey, guess what? I know how to solve that problem. It has a quick connect feature, so you can get connected anywhere in the world in one click, and you can set it to start up on boot, so you never even know what's there. NordVPN comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you download it and it doesn't do everything you wanted, then you can just cancel out of it without question. If you're curious, I've got a link below in the description with Your Name on it. Well, I guess actually it's my name, but that, you know what I mean. Just try it out. I'm not ranking these in any particular order, so if you're wondering why I'm opening the video with what might be the most significant change on the whole list of patch notes, then that's why. Separate damage scaling for PvP is something that we've always lacked, and I look forward to Elden Ring PvP being an extremely polished experience with absolutely no blemishes or exploits from this point forward. We already had separate scaling for a lot of talismans in PvP, but all that really involved was nerfing any damage negation talismans into near uselessness and calling it a day. The separate PvP mechanics involve damage scaling in a much more ubiquitous way, including what I think is the strongest change, which is that all weapon skills in PvP will be nerfed across the board. This will probably cut down on corpse piler spam. Probably not. It probably won't do that. In a way that also reinforces the standard combat flow of the game, like just attacking and dodging. Not only that, but the idea of a separate PvP scaling eliminates the worry of having to make changes in one mode without thinking about how it'll affect the other. I say all of this knowing damn well that getting one-tapped with Frenzied Burst by someone hiding out in Mount Fuckistan is probably something that's never going to change. The guard strength of the Fingerprint Stone Shield has been decreased. This change should be important for lots of obvious reasons, since the guard strength of the Fingerprint Shield was already ridiculous, but keep in mind this also doesn't affect anything else like damage negation or the amount of madness buildup that it has. A guard boost change from 90 to 86 does more than it sounds, because you end up losing about a third more stamina you used to when blocking. This keeps the Fingerprint Shield at the top when it comes to blocking all kinds of attacks, but fighting against it in PvP setting doesn't feel nearly as hopeless. Attacking with the shield remains unchanged, so you can still take advantage of some of the more powerful aspects of the shield like proccing madness, but things like shield grease and other guard boosters will also be less effective, since most of those buffs are percentage based. And when you add in all the poise damage buffs that some of the larger weapons have received across 1.07, suddenly this strat doesn't look as unbreakable as it used to. Basically what I'm saying is the wall is still a completely reasonable build to make, and you should still totally make it, only it feels more like an actual wall and less like a blast barrier. Guard penetration is a very specific feature on some weapons that allow the inflicting of damage even when someone else is blocking. This is found on all scythe weapons, but it can also be found on other curved sickle-like weapons like Shotel's, the Nox Flowing Sword, and the Celebrant's Sickle. This seems to be another press against how powerful Great Shields have become in PvP, but some of the most annoying and challenging enemies in the game usually have some sort of block. The Cleanrot Knights and Crucible Knights stand as great examples, but even some lesser enemies like Kaidan Sellswords and the Rhea Lucaria Wardens have blocking frames implemented in some of their heavier attacks. Scythes have always been a bit underappreciated in my opinion, despite being perfectly competent weapons with really good bleed buildup, but I guess since there are so many stronger options for inflicting bleed, scythes tend to just not be considered for that reason. Frozen Armament and Poison Armament have both received an increase in status buildup, which is extremely important, at least to me, because one of my recent videos actually featured a tip that mentioned using Poison Grease or Frozen Grease over their incantation counterparts. Before 1.07, the incantation variants of these buffs used to be only 45, but has since been upped to 70. 70. The poison and freezing grease buildup still stands at 63, so they aren't exactly inferior. It's honestly hard to say which one I would prefer over another, and I think that's a really good thing because it doesn't really feel like the armament incantations are just going to be the more effective tool for any job across the board. Drawstring greases still outperform the armament incantations in raw buildup while only lasting 10 seconds, further lending to the fact that you can see yourself using pretty much any of these for the job depending on what that job is. Across the board, a lot of the magic buffs probably didn't need to happen. Upping the glintstone pebbles damage is something I still don't get, but one particular aspect I really didn't like about the bubble sorceries was that they always locked you in place when casting them, and that was always an extremely risky move considering the longer wind-up animation and the slower projectile speed. I only ever used this sorcery during stealth and I wanted my first bit of damage to really count for something, but after looking at these patches I would be really curious to see how well they perform in the heat of combat. Now you can move around while it's spooling up, just like most other sorceries. Attack power has been improved as well, and the Great Bubble variant of the spell can also chew up more stamina against guarding enemies. Guys, holy shit, the Sword of Night and Flame is viable again. This weapon was given a pretty infamous sledgehammer back in 1.03, where in one fell swoop it went from legendary weapon to legendary paperweight. 1.07 manages to tweak the damage where it isn't as powerful as its pre-1.03 version, but it's enough to bring it back up in line with some of the other damage buffs they've made to other weapons and spells. Elden Ring has 9 legendary weapons you can find, and I don't think it's too outlandish of an opinion to want those legendary items to feel, you know, not crap. Yeah, you want them to feel legendary, you know? Not to the point of breaking the balance of the game, but enough to be worth seeking. And for a good chunk of time, this weapon was just not that. It was kind of worthless thanks to the nerfs it received back in the end of March. It also has one of the coolest and most unique weapon designs in the game, with some lore that ties in the existence of astrologers with the fire giants in a way that's really interesting. A weapon like this just deserves way more love, and I'm glad it's finally getting it. Okay, this is probably one of the most significant changes for me because I've never been a colossal sword user. I've always chosen great swords and the occasional great axe over larger weapons, and that's just because of the slower speed always felt like it was working to my detriment. So I'm happy to see that the colossal swords and weapons are getting a speed buff, and quite a substantial one, in fact. I thought the speed difference was going to be something closer to spellcasting with the Radagon icon or something, but it wasn't until I actually looked at these side by side when I realized just how huge of a change this is. In addition to just the time between attacks, this also decreases the recovery time after a normal attack, allowing you to perform other actions like healing and dodging much quicker. This is kind of amazing because I always slept on colossal weapons and swords because of this exact thing, and I've talked myself out of taking advantage of really powerful skills like Wave of Destruction and Gravity Bolt just because everything about the weapons those skills were attached to felt so slow and unusable. Reduced damage detection time has been added to the SPEARCALL ritual weapon skill, and basically what this means is enemies who are targeted by this will take an extra hit or two during the duration of the skill. I demonstrated in one of my quick tips videos that the SPEARCALL ritual usually hits around 5 times per use depending on the size of the enemy and where exactly it was in relation to the spears, but it looks like that's been upped to around 6 hits on average. The SPEARCALL ritual was always one of my favorite skills to use because it felt like a more consistent version of something like Radahn's Rain. Each spear seems to have a much larger hitbox than a standard arrow, but the rate at which something gets damaged by them is much lower. This is why you see 20-something projectiles raining down from the air, yet the enemy only gets hit around 5 or 6 times. In addition to being a straight-up DPS increase for the skill, I can imagine this also heightens the usefulness of this when used with Shard of Alexander, the winged swords, and pretty much any talisman that affects weapon skills. ONYX Lord's Repulsion has been slept on quite a bit, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it just feels natural to a lot of players to bring enemies in for damage than it does to push them away and make space, but using crowd control mechanics to blast fuckazoids off cliff sides and off ledges and whatnot has long been one of my favorite ways to dispose of all kinds of mobs in Souls games. For a while that used to be the rejection incantation, but now I'm starting to find a new appreciation for the repulsion skill. Also, it's worth mentioning the extra poise buffs across the board for just about every armor set. I don't know if that's exactly what's affecting this, but this thing got some new hyper armor from somewhere, and now it actually takes effort for me to get knocked out of this thing. Like, I'm not kidding. The only times where I actually struggled to follow through was when I was getting tail whipped by a dragon or something. Smaller enemies just can't do anything once you've popped this off. They just can't stand up to this. Remember when I mentioned Regal Roar didn't work with the Roar Medallion talisman? Well, guess what they fixed? You can still proc the Crimson Dagger effect twice with Colossal weapons, but Regal Roar, that was what the people wanted. That's what needed to be fixed. Honestly, Regal Roar I think is one of the skills that have changed the most with 1.07. It's now compatible with Roar Talisman, which is great, but the list of buffs it's also received from the patch I think are much more significant. The effect duration has extended first and foremost, but the amount of time between activating the skill and being able to perform actions has also massively decreased, which addresses a major problem a lot of players had with the skill, being the long wind-up time that has you literally just standing in this statue-like pose for 3 seconds like you're asserting dominance or something, but really you're just being vulnerable to anything that wants to ruin your day. Strong attacks also have less downtime while they're performed during the effect of the skill, so despite having no real damage increases, this still seems like a much more powerful skill than it was before. This one's a bit weird, but I'm gonna try and explain it. Under a lot of certain weapon skills, you can read on the Elden Ring patch notes a repeated phrase that says added damage detection to weapon part. All weapon skills you see this phrase under involve a projectile attack or something that launches from the weapon itself. And what this means is hitting an enemy with not only the projectile part of the skill, but the weapon itself will now result in a chunk of extra damage. This has been seen on plenty of weapon skills before, but with 1.07, other skills like Bloodblade, Moonlight Greatsword, Taker's Flames, and Mikola's Ring of Light now take the weapon hitbox into account when the skill is used. Even with projectile-based weapon skills, sneaking up to an unaware enemy and barrel stuffing them might not be too bad of a strategy with this new change. This is one that I really don't see a lot of people talking about, and I guess that's because it doesn't really lead to anything significant. It doesn't accidentally create true combos when combined with other attacks or something, but it's just a nice quality of life feature that I think a lot of certain weapon skills were lacking. Thundercloud form and some of the Dragon Communion incantations like Dragon Claw and Dragon Maw have increased directional control. You no longer feel like you can't alter your trajectory after the skill is activated, and it really reduces the amount of commitment you have to make when using them. Melania was already weak to Thundercloud form as it is because she just didn't know how to dodge it, but I imagine you can spray even more cheese whiz down her throat with these directional changes. No significant boost or anything, no DPS increases or animation speed, just good old-fashioned quality of life kind of shit that I think is always welcome. That's it, I guess. Yeah, there's no more video after this. So, subscribe or perish.